let's get our speakers settled into their places first. You're going to be able to speak from there. Would that be okay? Or do you want to stand? What do you think is best?
I'll stand.
You'll stand. Okay, Alice, do you have space to sit there?
Yeah.
Sorry, we're just working out the geography of this, of course. So my name's Patrick Wallis. I suppose I was invited because I spent a bit of time in my 20s thinking about apothecaries, which leads to Petiver, although I know nothing about Petiver apart from the fact that he was coming at the end of my period. So I'm very excited to hear these two papers, which I think should show us a great deal about Petiver as an apothecary and as an active participant in the world of London's natural history. I'm going to introduce each in turn, and the first is by Katrina Maydom, who is completing shortly a PhD at the University of Cambridge on medicine in the Atlantic world, covering the 17th and parts of the 18th century. Is that correct? Good, she can't disagree with me at this point. Katrina is going to be talking to us about collected rarities and James Petiver's apothecary practice. So, Katrina, do you have enough space?
Yes.
Okay.
It's done.
You must be one of these, right? Petiver's power.
No. I was on the desktop.
There we are.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to give a big thank you to Richard Colton and Charlie Jarvis, who were instrumental in organizing all of this and making today possible. So thank you very much. Here is a map of London in 1682. It's William Morgan's map, and this box here, the black box, is the area where there was a concentration of Petiver's medical activities. And this map was created just 3 years before Petiver's shop was established, which is this blue square, which is at a major crossroads of the Barbican, Aldersgate, and Goswell, and Long Lane. And it's near both the Charterhouse, the Green Square, and St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where Petiver was active and supplied both of these institutions with medical drugs. And as you heard in Richard's introduction, he had his apprenticeship at St. Bartholomew's and was an apothecary to the Charterhouse. There's also the Society of Apothecaries nearby with the red square. Petiver's apothecary journals and correspondence reveal how his professional medical practice was intertwined with his botanical collecting activities and engagement in scholarly networks. Through Petiver's work as a naturalist and apothecary, we can gain unique insights into the movement and consumption of medicinal drugs and their associated knowledge. So Petiver operated on a few different levels of drug provision. He was an institutional supplier. He had individual retail. Excuse me. If I move this forward, is that better? Okay. At the individual retail level, and he did also have some charitable provision from his shop. So at the institutional level, Petiver was apprenticed to Charles Feltham, and that connection probably helped him gain the position of being an apothecary supplier following when he became a freeman in 1685. And this image is St. Bart's depicted in 1720. So Petiver was also the apothecary to the Charterhouse for 18 years until his death in 1718. And he used his medical connections once again to probably get this position with the reference on the left side there from the Royal College of Physicians, which was likely supported by Hans Sloane, that emphasized his knowledge of botany and natural philosophy. and this is the Charter House as pictured in 1739. So while Petiver was at the Charter House, he was paid a salary and also for his physic. And in the image here is a list of the commonly prescribed drugs that was given to the pensioners at the Charter House Hospital who were elderly and infirm. And also he treated scholars who were boys at the Charter House School. And it's interesting to note that his prices were evaluated and vouched for as moderate and reasonable by the Society of Apothecaries, and that pensioners could have access to ipecacuanha, which is from South America, for an additional price. So Petiver's contract was renewed every 2 years by the governors, and nearly all of his prescriptions were for pensioners of scholars, but he did also treat the staff of the Charter House, including the butler and the saddler. And quite a few of the transactions were repeat prescriptions, which makes sense because of the pensioners having long ongoing illnesses that would require multiple prescriptions. So I'm now going to look at Petiver's retail trade, and we see here one of Petiver's 6 prescription books, and an example of one of its folio pages, so you can see what it looks like. And these 6 prescription books comprise 1,454 folio pages, the ones that are still extant. And these are unique source that provide information about who he was treating, where they were from, what drugs they were taking, how much of the drugs, and sometimes how much they paid for their treatment. So we can actually locate Petiver's shop from the address that was given on letters to him, which notes the Sun Tavern in Aldersgate Street. And we can see that Petiver's shop is, the arrow is just right over the Sun Tavern, which is 43 on this map of Aldersgate in 1720. And we can see that's one of those 2 buildings bordering the Sun Tavern and the Aldersgate Street. So between 1687 and 1710, Petiver filled around 40,000 prescriptions in his private practice. The most commonly prescribed medicines were ready-made ones that he didn't prepare at the point of purchase, that he had ready-made to prescribe. And they were, the 3 most common that I saw were the pill stomach encephalic, which was used to treat headaches and stomach pains, bolus purgatives, which were large purging pills, and elixir antiscorbutic, which was a drink to treat scurvy. So what does one of Petiver's prescriptions look like? I have up here a transcription and a translation of an example of a prescription. In this case, Mrs. Giles' child had a prescription for half a dram of Contrayera root, 12 grains of Virginia snake root, which were mixed and then divided into 3 parts. The directions for how to consume the medication was that the child was to take a draught late in the morning after food. Petiver also had quite a few large orders where he would send drugs, or people would come collect them from his shop. And this is an example of one to Mr. Wheeler at Portsgrund in Norway, who requested glasses of various elixirs and purgatives, as well as 10 ounces of marmalade, purgative at 6 pence a dose, and 4 grams of Terra-Sinica at 3 pence a dram. So we have here the rates and how much is being bought and where it's going. He also supplied captains and surgeons on ships with drugs for their voyages. So Petiver's private practice, we can see both the buyers and the patients, or the people who actually took the drugs, and the buyers is roughly equal division between male and female, a few more men. And men tended to buy drugs for their wives and friends, and women often bought drugs for themselves and for their children. But we can see the majority of people bought drugs for themselves, with 70%, with the next group being children at 23%. So this is based on 2 periods. I did a selection from 1693 and 1698. Here's an example of an order which was by correspondence, where Joseph Bentham asked Petiver to send a repeat prescription for his daughter through the carrier Richard Rees to Stevenage. And another letter, Bentham made a specific request for 2 ounces of gentian root, zeddery, and an ounce of spirit of hartshorn, and half a dozen Seville oranges and lemons. So he tells Petiver exactly what he wants and how much of it to be sent to him. So Petiver also occasionally offered a charitable practice on Tuesday and Saturday mornings. He said at 10 o'clock, he'll give medicines for nothing to the first poorly that came to him. And he often treated family members, including his uncle and mother. And here in this image is his mother receiving an astringent plaster. So how did Petiver's private practice compare with his institutional practice? And we see that in private practice, Petiver saw more patients per day, about double. He saw about 6 patients per day, whereas at the Charterhouse it was about 3. And in his private practice, he also made more elaborate medications where he would do more mixtures for them, and they were much more likely to get more than one drug, whereas the Charterhouse, more people would just be given one drug. So Petiver was an influential member of the Society of Apothecaries, and he served on several committees. Here's an image of the Apothecaries' Hall from the late 17th century. Probably his most important role there was being a demonstrator at the Society's Physic Garden in Chelsea, where he kept a close eye on the various plant collections there, and he would report regularly to the Royal Society, of which he was a fellow, what their current collections held. And in this garden, apprentices would also be trained. So in these images, we have a plan of the Physic Garden from 1725 and the Physic Garden in use in 1750. So a lot of Petiver's collectors who were in his network also became his customers, and Petiver would give drugs in exchange for collectibles and for native knowledge. So this is tapping into Petiver's global networks here. And here's an example. Captain Nern asked, he wanted 10 pots of Leucotellus balsam, pound each for completing his book of Native American medicinal plants with their names and uses. And Joseph Lord also requested 18 different drugs in exchange for various mosses, stones, fossils, and berries. Many of Petiver's correspondents and collectors were medical practitioners themselves. Kathleen Murphy, who's speaking later today, she has identified that ship surgeons and colonial medical practitioners were the 2 largest groups in Petiver's network of correspondents in the Atlantic world, And medical and collecting matters were often discussed in the same letter. Here's an example of a letter from Jan Ingerson to Petiver, where he discusses his problems with gout and how he used Petiver's medicines to treat it, and then also is reporting on the varieties of plants that he could furnish Petiver with. So there was definitely an interconnection between botanical and medicinal knowledge for Petiver, and he was friends with Samuel Dale and John Ray, with whom he collaborated with to develop furthering both botanical and medical knowledge. And these few fields he saw as mutually informative. And here I'd like to say thank you to Arnold Hunt, who has shared his forthcoming paper about understanding Petiver's archive with me. And I found this quote here, which was in his article. Perhaps many plants which grow in such abundant plenty with us to be of more virtue or use than we have hitherto found or conceived, and are not yet reckoned amongst our materia medica, which delivers the idea quite well. The Royal Society chose Petiver to give his thoughts and discoveries on account of plants and drugs presented by the East India Company. And Petiver was pronounced to be the fittest person for this task because he had seen these plants in other collections, being raised from seeds and described in books. And Petiver tried to prove himself to the Royal Society as a source of medical as well as botanical knowledge and become an authority on both topics. Looking towards medicine and collecting Petiver's publications, in the Philosophical Transactions, Petiver argued that herbs of the same botanical class would have similar medicinal properties and could therefore treat related illnesses. And he evidenced this idea with plants that he had received through his collecting networks, which he used in his apothecary practice. And he says here, no less noble herbs of this family that I have lately received from both the East and the West Indies, which I have also experienced in some cases with very good success. So that's his claim through his experience and actually seeing it realized. In another series of letters in the Philosophical Transactions, Petiver prominently noted the medicinal virtues of exotic drugs and their directions of use and their origins. So he has examples. Here's a few, one from Africa, East Indies, and then in the Chelsea Visit Garden, which he heads under all different regions of the world. So Petiver actively monitored the latest medicinal plant collections and their adoption into medical practice, and he would keep a careful eye on everyone else's collections as much as he could, and he wrote a list, for example, he wrote a list of 20 of Pierre Pomme's drugs which he wanted, which he coveted, and in his Musée Petiverani, Petiver notes which of the plants were of medicinal use in the shops, so which ones had come into actual retail use. So in conclusion, Petiver gives us a unique insight into the circulation of drugs and knowledge about them. His profession as an apothecary gave him the social position and financial resources to engage in collecting, in addition to his firsthand experience with a wide range of medical drugs. He has left us a rich set of sources that help us to understand the experience of drug retailing and consumption through his prescription books and the letters that patients wrote to him. Thank you.